understand why I can't sleep through the Prescott's vacation photos at home.
Because come this fall, after our Colombian cruise, you're gonna want to show off all your photos, and you're gonna want to have Duke come over and take his nap. But do remember, it's not a competition.
No? Then what's this little reconnaissance mission that we are on?
Oh, hush.
Joyce, Earl, come in. Oh, so glad you could make it. Can I offer you something to drink? Tea, perhaps? Duke has this wonderful vintage he saved from the Boston Harbor.
Here we go.
Duke, the Hendersons are here. They call it the Revolutionary War, but I think the real revolution is the invention of soap.
Indeed. I was just telling Earl the other day, back when we saw off Lewis over with this.
Here's your tea. Now, put plenty of sugar in it. It's bitter, but genuine.
Bitter, but genuine. Just like the hostess. Ow!
Let me check what's keeping Duke.
Why didn't you say something?
You kicked me for saying something.
I kicked you for being rude. Why didn't you say anything when she interrupted my story about this soap?
You have a story about soap.
You remember.
Duke's on his way.
So, honey, how was the revolution? Did you stop at that postcard shop I read about? The one where you can get a selfie as Paul Revere rides by?
Well, I was...
Earl, Joyce, so glad you could come. How's the tea? Did honey give you the bad news?
Bad news.
He's exaggerating.
You were pretty exaggerated when I told you that travel agency news, no technology newer than 1800.
So no pictures.
Oh, honey, how distressing. We were so looking forward to them.
Don't worry. I found a loophole.
She hired somebody. I had to pay his way so he could document our every move.
He took nearly 250,000 pictures.
How perfectly marvelous. Where do you keep them all?
Well, that's the bad news. It appears in my haste, I hired one of those 20th century photographers who does everything on film. Said it's going to take a whole year to develop them.
He took nearly 250,000 pictures on film?
Oh, honey, we completely understand. Back when we were young and reckless, we went to the Roaring 20s. We went to the Roaring 20s and hired an absolute genius. He went back to his lab, spent about a year developing the film, put the photos in a safety deposit box in our name. By the time we got back, all our photos were there.
Well, I suggested something like that, but apparently not even time travel can hurry Ansel Adams.
The landscape photographer.
Oh, Boston is beautiful in '76.
Especially with us in the foreground.
Oh, so tell me all about Boston. Was it everything they say? All the massacres and the combing out of lice?
The revolution was incredible. Why, we even got to watch Thomas Jefferson write the Declaration of Independence. So inspirational.
They just don't make men like Tom Jefferson no more.
Only natural.
Earl, don't.
Well, meeting Thomas Jefferson, I came home changed.
She came home and changed the drapes.
Colonial lace?
Uh-huh.
Oh, stop it. We should change our drapes.
Now, what's wrong with Dolly Madison's drapes?
Say, Pilgrim, what do you mean by there being no men like Thomas Jefferson anymore?
Earl, don't.
There's no men like Tom Jefferson no more, on account of there's no great war, great crisis, or great scientific discoveries to be made. It's hard to be a general when everything has already been solved through war. It's hard to be a statesman when there's no crisis to solve. It's hard to be a scientist when everything's already been discovered. We live in a boring point in history where all the Tom Jeffersons and the like have cut out to more interesting times.
Earl, that's insulting. You'll have to forgive.
Earl, that's genius. How'd you figure that out?
A schoolmate of mine, ugly kid, poor too.
Ooh.
He did all of his Euclid on the back of envelopes and talked about self-evident truths and the like. Then one day, he just up and disappeared. I figured that he had moved, but the neighbor girl found his picture in a history book, a real daguerreotype. It was dated 1846, the first known photograph of the Abraham Lincoln.
No.
Yes.
That's excellent. I'm going to use that. Say, that explains something to me.
What's that?
Ever wonder why we don't see anyone from the future vacationing in our time?
Oh, Duke, don't get started with that end of the world nonsense again. He thinks something awful's gonna happen, like a nuclear war or an epidemic, or Earth is invaded by aliens.
Yeah.
Well, I always figured that time travel gets outlawed by the government.
No, no, no. As someone who went to school with Abraham Lincoln, you ought to have realized it.
Realized what?
We're too boring.
Oh, Duke, don't be cynical.
We live in flyover country, honey. Nothing ever happens here. All the Thomas Jeffersons and Abraham Lincolns have moved on to more exciting times. We live after the end of history.
Oh, honey, Boston or no, photos or no at Boston, we came to hear about it.
Well, there really isn't much to say.
We got scooped.
Duke, don't call it that. He's teasing.
Scooped! Yet we hadn't been in Boston but 2 days when we ran into the Bodwells.
The Bodwells? I didn't think they could afford Boston in '76.
Well, our Bodwells can, but these weren't our Bodwells. The girls were all grown up. They were like 10 years older than our Bodwells.
Yeah, seems they get an inheritance or win the lottery or something and splurge it on a grand history tour.
They told me that they was saving up for that. Scrimping.
Well, all I know is at this very moment, in that shabby little house down the street, they are compiling a list of all of the best times to visit anywhere in the world.
In the world?
Well, I'm sure they meant the East Coast.
Say, do they ever visit the old neighborhood? It's not all shambles by then, is it?
Are you kidding? Honey wouldn't say one word about when we left. Not the way they kept complimenting her and how well her looks are holding up.
Well, we had better be going. Oh, honey, thank you so much for the invitation, and Duke, thank you for the tea.
You're not leaving.
I'm afraid we must, if Earl doesn't get his nap.
Earl, lead to rise and Earl, lead to bed, as our friend Benny would say.
Yes, wasn't Benjamin Franklin in Philadelphia in '76?
Yes, with Thomas Jefferson. Come on now, dear.
But Joyce, oh, you didn't get a chance to tell us about that Colombian cruise you're taking next fall. Are you learning Spanish?
This fall, dear, and Columbus was Italian, but I'm afraid we must be going. Do invite us back when your Polaroids come in.
Well, of course, of course. And I'm so glad you enjoyed the tea. If you'd like more, just ask. Do squeezed out more of that awful harbor water than I can drink in a year.
I doubt that. Bye now. You told them about our cruise?
Of course not. After all that time that I spent investigating the travel agencies to make sure they couldn't go somewhere earlier.
They did book somewhere earlier. They only skimmed through Boston on the way back through the 1600s. That photo was of them giving John Smith a cigarette in a canoe.
They went to Jamestown? I knew they didn't meet Thomas Jefferson. They hardly sounded all liberty, equality, and fraternity to me.
They knew we saw off Lewis and Clark last fall, and that we expected them to visit the Revolution. But instead of letting us have an easy French and Indian War, they skipped over pre-revolutionary America entirely. They upped the budget.
Isn't that why you wanted the Columbian cruise?
Stop. You still think you let something slip.
I'm sure it was the Bodwells.
The Bodwells, them and their world history tour. It just isn't fair. The Columbian cruise just doesn't cut it anymore. Do you think we can still change our plans? You know, Columbus wasn't the first person to discover America. We could take a Viking cruise!
But you hate the cold!
Oh, don't be absurd, dear. Our vacations aren't about me.